Thank you, Ernie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ann Packard. I'm an alcoholic. There is no place I would rather be than here tonight. Lights or no lights. I was kind of hoping maybe we would have this by candlelight because I look better the darker it is. I have been sober 28 years, and the reason I tell you that is not with any sense of great pride, a little, but not a whole lot. Too many people sit and listen to a person talk and they wonder. They're so busy wondering how long the person's been sober, they don't pay any attention to anything that's being said. I also will tell my age, because you're wondering about that too. I am 66 years old. Now, I know that's hard for you to believe, but that is the truth. It's an honest program, okay? I was raised in the South, born with 3 strikes against me, red-headed, left-handed, and an only child. My father had great ideas of what I was going to be, a sports writer. All kinds of outdoorsy things like fishing and so forth. My mother wanted me to be a poetess. She wanted me to be a musician. She wanted me to have high principles. They kept after me from both ends until I was half dead with trying to keep up with everybody and ended up doing absolutely nothing. So often I think this happens to only children. We just can't seem to measure up and just finally give in and throw the towel. I was educated, however, after a very rough high school. In my day, you were not supposed to be tall. Janet Gaynor and Billy Dove were the girls who were in the movies that everyone admired. I was 5'8", unheard of. All the boys in my school had a vitamin deficiency. I could look over the head of every single one of them when I was dancing. It was very disquieting to me, and I never quite recovered. I have scoliosis to this day from trying to get myself down in a manageable position. I fell in love with a guy who was the captain of the basketball team, and he left me for the preacher's daughter, and I never went to that church again. I was sent up to Baltimore to college because they wanted me to see what city streets looked like. They didn't have any in Chapel Hill at the time. I was a perfect pain in the neck as a college student. Whenever the girls would creep out at night for various reasons, getting beer, staying out a few hours, even spending nights in fraternity houses, I'd go and tell the house mother. I was very popular, as you can imagine. I felt it was my duty. I went to Goucher, and I never had any dates. Nobody ever asked me to go anywhere. I was perfectly miserable, and I was studying so hard, and all the other girls were having such a hell of a good time. And I went home to my father, and I complained. I said, how come I'm not having any fun? And all these girls are doing these things, and he said, don't you worry, little girl. Those boys don't have any respect for those girls. I want you to know, every one of those girls married a millionaire. It was my first encounter with how you have to unlearn everything that you're ever taught. I married an alcoholic. I couldn't understand what was the matter with the man. Married to me and running out at night and carrying on, coming home 4 o'clock in the morning. And where I came from in Chapel Hill, when husband started acting like this, you went home to your daddy. I had a father complex anyway, coupled with a mother fixation. Wasn't until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous that I found out every girl living has got a father complex coupled with a mother fixation. But I didn't know it at the time. I took my baby and I went home to my daddy in Chapel Hill. And it was there that I met the Navy. There was a war going on, World War II. Every time I think about the Navy to this day, I get misty. I realize now I had been uncomfortable my entire life. I don't think I had ever been comfortable. That's the only word I can think of. And when I got with the Navy and I took the first double shot, I was comfortable. That is, to me, the most heavenly feeling. I have had lots of feelings in my life. I have had lots of pleasures, including ice cream sundaes and all that kind of stuff. But that first shot of straight whiskey did something to me, and I never forgot it. And I pursued it from then on. Now, I don't go into a long harangue about every little detail that happened to me. You know, you can go crazy listening to a speaker sometimes who gets all mixed up about whether you had a ham sandwich or a cheese sandwich, or whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday, or no, he believed it was Friday, or it was toasted or untoasted, and you just feel like you're going to lose your mind if he doesn't get on with it. And he gets through about half an hour or so, and he still haven't even got him into the booze. He's still back in the childhood somewhere. So I choose a few incidents that'll show you the progression of my illness. I don't make a smutty talk either. I feel like that's more exciting to you if you use your imagination. I don't think you got to go into a whole lot of dirty details about anything. When I start telling you about my life, you can pretty well put things together, what was going on. I decided that I needed to be of service to others. So many alcoholics get hung up on this. When you begin to feel worthless, and you try to do something for someone else. I went to work in a drying out hospital. And also it was a maternity hospital for unwed mothers. And I chose the unwed mothers because I wanted to have nothing to do with alcohol, naturally. And I was perfectly miserable. I couldn't understand why they were in the shape they were in, and they couldn't understand why I was in the shape I was in. And we met an impasse, and I was fired, and I never did another thing for another living soul until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. I got even with them all. After this bitter experience, I decided what I needed was romance. I was 27, and I married a young man, 21. And he never let me forget it. That marriage was the most awful marriage that you can imagine. Every nasty, vile, rotten, stinking thing that you can say to another person was said. He used to throw me down the steps. He told me that after having had all this experience, with an old woman that he was going to leave me and go down to Florida and become a gigolo. And I said to him, well, if you're going to be a gigolo, you're going to have to learn how to do certain things. And he says to me, how were things back in the Civil War? It was just one of these things that left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I decided to give up men. I was all the time giving up men. I started giving up men when I was about 10 years old. I then decided I needed glamour. This shows the progression. And of all places to decide to go to get glamour, I went to Arthur Murray's. I became an Arthur Murray dancing teacher. There are very few professions on the face of this earth in which you are in closer contact with the customer than you are at Arthur Murray's. So every day I had a choice of whether I was going to stink or whether it was going to shake. And I used to be reported by my pupils as they would say, I think the teacher has a nervous disorder. I taught at that school and invented a way of dancing they use today, in case of any of you have been there. It is called Let the Pupil Dance Alone, to improve his footwork. I would stand as far away from the pupil as possible and tell him to dance toward me so that I could watch his footwork. They are still using it, and I have never gotten a damn cent. I wanted to be discovered. We used to have a big television show on Sunday night. And I thought maybe somebody would notice me. But the only thing they ever let me show were my feet. Do you remember those feet? If you ever saw the program, those two poor, pitiful feet doing the magic step at the beginning of the program, those were my feet. And nobody ever asked me to sign a contract. And I left. I then began to go into hospitals. I was getting very ill. I went into a hospital, and I was so depressed and suicidal that the doctor took one look at me and he said, you know what's the matter with you? You've got all kinds of trash in your brain. You have got bad thoughts. You are just a perfect mess, and what I'm going to do is just knock them all out of your head. Electric shock was being used in those days. He says, I'm going to give you electric shock treatment, and by the time I am finished with you, you won't have any of these bad thoughts left. You're going to have a clean sheet above the neck. And we can start all over and see if we can't get something going for you. So he gave me 21 shock treatments, and he was absolutely right. I did not know my name. I did not know where I was. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know what in the hell was going on. And he looked very pleased. But then he said to me, what is going on in your mind? And I said, well, I don't know why, but for some strange reason, I feel like I'd like a drink. Absolutely amazing. Every woman that I've ever talked to in AA has said they don't identify with me. They'll come up and they'll say, I don't identify with a lot of the things you say, and I never did any of the things you did, and I always say, well, maybe you never had the chance. But I'll tell you one thing. Every girl I've ever talked to has always wanted to go to New York. And after I finished with Arthur Murray and the mental hospitals, I took off to New York. And in New York, I met an Arab. Now, I'm not talking about some Arab that sells vegetables in the street. I'm talking about a real, live Arab. One of those ones with the head thing that sweeps through the United Nations. You've seen them. They sweep through the United Nations. He was with the United Nations, and he thought I was really neat. The first time a man had really seemed to care too much about me for a long time, he said that he thought that the United States was too small for me, and that he was going to fix that. And so I married him, and we went to Arabia. Now, I will tell you one place on the face of this earth that a drunken woman has got no business going. I think subconsciously I thought that if I got in a place that was dry enough, maybe I'd dry up too. His family took a very dim view of me. I was drunk whenever possible. And I had one of my experiences there that I thought were the DTs. I looked out my window one morning, and there was a bunch of little goats running down the street with little flowered skirts on. Well, now, you see something like this and you don't tell anybody. And I didn't. I was perfectly miserable, and every morning I would look out there, and they'd come, and they just had a little way of trotting along, you know, and their little skirts would just... I was desperate. I needed a drink, something awful, and nobody was coming. These people are Muslims. They don't drink. Where are you going to get a bottle in Arabia, for the love of heaven? But then, as so often happens with us, we get a break. I looked out the window, and there was an Englishman walking carefully. He had a bag under his arm. How do we know these things? I've never seen the guy before. People have such funny ways of describing alcoholics anyway. You know, we're always pictured hanging on to a lamp post. I have been sober in AA 28 years and lived a long time before that, and I have never seen a drunk in a tuxedo hanging on a lamppost in my life. Also, over top of his head, they have hick. Now, what's that supposed to mean? Alcoholics don't hiccup, throw up. Social drinkers hiccup. It's because of all that crap they eat when they're drinking, all that shrimp stuff. And they have a funny idea about how we walk. Somebody says, oh, here's a drunk person walking down the street, and they fall into all the furniture, and they carry on, and they fall down 2 or 3 flights of steps. That's supposed to be the way we walk. We don't walk that way. Any alcoholic with any sense knows if he shuts one eye, he can get through any door in the world. And when we are sober, we walk carefully. You can't take too many chances, you know, especially when we're carrying precious cargo. I approached the gentleman. I said, you know where a girl can get a drink around here? I'm out in the middle of the desert. And he said, yes, it just so happened that he had some with him. And we retired to a little cave called a cafe of some kind. And while we were drinking, and I got confidential. You know how you get confidential, the deepest, darkest secrets in the world. You have 2 or 3 drinks and you tell it to the world. You can't find a bartender, you tell it to the nearest person. I said to him, there's something I got to ask you about. And he said, is it about the goats? It seems that in Arabia, they put skirts on goats. Don't ask me. The little children run around naked, and the goats got on skirts. It's supposed to, you know, keep the milk for the families, you know. If the little goats were running around free, people would steal the milk, or the baby goats would drink it, or something, but you know that wonderful feeling of relief? It's like when somebody says your car's out front. You know, there are times in your life when you're drinking, you just got to have something to just keep you going. We left Arabia, my poor husband, the Arab, and he took me over to a country called Somaliland. It's on the east coast of Africa on the Indian Ocean. It's on the equator. It's 110 at all times. Just exactly what I needed. I was approached when I entered that country by a group of young Somali men, aged about 25. They spoke Somali and they spoke Arabic and a little Italian. But their country was to get its independence in 1960, and they were very anxious to learn English and learn to speak it and write it. They were highly intelligent, and naturally they picked me, mainly because I was the only American in the country. And I consented. And you know when you are down and out and sick and drunk, and somebody asks you to do something like this, and you burst into tears, because then I knew why I had been put on the earth. You know, to bring a little light into a darkness. And I cried and sobbed and carried on and got very emotional about myself and how worthwhile I was, and oh, it was really maudlin. I taught those poor boys for 2 solid years. You know, I have a southern accent, in case you haven't noticed. And when I'm drunk, it's worse. I am the original magnolia blossom when I am drunk. And by the time I had finished with those poor boys, for 2 years they were all speaking English with a drunken southern accent. The British consul came through. He had heard about this lovely American woman who was doing so much for these boys and all this stuff, and he came to one of my classes, and I was telling him the story of Little Red Riding Hood. and they didn't even know what a wolf was. He had a heart attack just from the sheer shock of it when these boys started speaking. In 1960, I was sober by then. I got sober in 57. 60, I'm looking at the television because I want to watch and see about the Somalis getting admitted to the United Nations. I was real interested. And I said to myself, maybe one of my students will have been chosen to go to the United Nations. The Somalis are entirely too intelligent to have done that. They sent a guy who didn't speak English at all, rather than send one of my boys who had said you all and honey child and God only knows what. I had a wild time in Africa. You know, I always tried to hang on to the old traditions of my family. Why is it that the worse we get and the lower we get down with our alcoholism, the more we become conscious of our family traditions and how things are done in my family? And you can't even lift a finger and you're worried about principles. I had to have fried chicken on Sunday because I was from the South. And the temperature is 110, and it's cooking over charcoal, and I got to have fried chicken. And you don't send out for it, you know. So I had a bunch of rotten little bantam chickens sitting out chirping and carrying on in a little coop out back, and I treasured them because it was a sign of my upbringing. And one night a great big snake came and wrapped himself around my chicken coop. A python. They got him over there. And the houseboy came running to me and he says, there's a big snake going to get your chickens. He was one of my students. And I rushed out as only we do, fearless. And I said, you stop that. Just because I'm living in Africa doesn't mean I have to put up with this kind of thing. And he went away. The Arab said he probably got a whiff of your breath. He said he was a Muslim snake. I don't know how I lived through the thing. Running around in the bushes. They say, be careful. You know, there are lions there. They got those short-tailed lions over there. They don't have those ones that like they have in the zoos with the long tails with the fluff on the end. They have mean lions with little short tails. Very ferocious. I go out in the bushes anyway. I said, I'm an American citizen. He wouldn't dare bite me. How can we be so arrogant? And when I got a hangover and I'm lying in bed, I put my foot down on the floor and there's a cockroach and I damn near have DT. I don't know how I lived through it. I really don't. But I did. It's funny now. But I came back to the States, and the first thing that happened to me was that I lost the Arab. And Arabs aren't easy to come by. And a lot of other awful things began to happen to me. I lost the custody of my child. My first husband, who was an attorney, had never been in a drying out place. He had never had electric shock treatments. He'd never been picked up for drinking. He never told anybody he was drinking. He went into a court and he looked good. I'd been in nut houses, electric shock, running all over the world, married 3 times, divorced 3 times, and I found out something. A drinking woman hasn't got a Chinaman's chance. You are wrong no matter what. If you have a reputation of being a drunk, I didn't stand a chance, and a judge told me that he didn't even think I should have visiting privileges with this chum. And he took him away from me. And my friends, well-meaning probably, and my family thought, this will bring her to her knees. They have now taken her child from her, and that is all she has left. But you know how we are. That isn't what does it. I drank worse. Everything was gone. There was no reason for me to continue. I became more and more suicidal and more depressed. Now, you know, I have always had a terrible time with dressing when I was drinking. It is a very serious problem for alcoholics. I didn't have any elastic in any of my clothes anymore. It was unheard of. I put safety pins everywhere. I'd sometimes have 4 or 5 safety pins in my underpants alone. Not to mention my brassiere, what was left of it, and my slip. I mean, I couldn't have gotten through an airport to get on a plane. I was afraid of clothes. You know, I'll show you somebody really dumb, an alcoholic who's drinking who wears a pullover sweater. You can get in there and never get out again as long as you live. They just come and find you someday, caught up in there. You've got to be careful what you're putting on. You know, sometimes you're terribly depressed for weeks, and then all of a sudden you go in a bar and have a couple of drinks, and you get elated. And get that sexy feeling. You know, you sort of start moving around like this. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but you just feel like doing that, you know? And parading around, and I noticed a couple of guys over in the corner just having hysterics. I didn't know what their problem was. And I looked down, and my purple sweater, the arms had gotten down to my ankles. I mean, this was the way I live. Also, I found out about blouses. God help a person who bought a blouse that buttoned down the back. You just couldn't wear it, that's all. I always wore a dress that opened all the way down the front. At night, I got so good at it, I could take all of my clothes off. My dress, what was left of my brassiere, my underpants, and my hose, all in one swoop. Just all business. Just take it all off. Put it on a chair. Okay? And I got up in the mornings and trying to hold on to this little half job I had. I couldn't be looking for this and looking for that. I got to have it consolidated. One chair. It was kind of comforting, too. Nighttime, you know how lonely you get. Look over there and look kind of like a person. Kind of talk to it a little, you know. Well, one night, I was smoking very heavily and drinking very heavily. I know that during the night, I knocked over the ashtray. When I got up in the morning, it was all over the floor. I was so sick, I didn't know how I was going to make it. I was a perfect mess. I had forgotten to save a drink. I remember going to the waste paper basket and trying to find a long cigarette butt, but I had dumped some beer cans in there, and they had gotten the cigarettes all wet. And I took them out and put them on the radiator and tried to get them dried out enough to light them. It was one of those awful mornings when you just should be dead, that's all. And the room was in turmoil, and my little friend on the chair had fallen off on the floor. So I gathered him up and proceeded to pull it up over my little body. And I went out to get on the bus, and I won't go into the getting on the bus. You know what it's like to get on a bus. You don't know whether to give your hand and get the change or whether to give the change. Or, it's just ghastly, just getting on the damn thing. So I got on the bus, and I got in the back, and I proceeded to have dry heaves. Now, there is nothing on earth more wonderful than to be sitting in the back of a bus having dry heaves and pretending you're coughing, which doesn't fool anybody. And in the midst of all this, 4 perfectly repulsive little high school girls got on that bus. Nastiest looking things I ever saw. They had on little blue bloomers and little blue uniforms, little blue socks, little shoelaces, pencil boxes. It was repulsive. And they began to laugh. In fact, they became hysterical. And I'm sitting there in the back of the bus, and I'm saying, isn't it awful the way the younger generation has no respect for anything? And the more I became aware of these girls, I realized they were looking at my legs. Now, my legs aren't that funny. And finally, summoning up every ounce of strength I had, I looked down at my legs. And in my hose were cigarette butts. Little pieces of paper. Ashes. Burned out matchsticks. It was the most ungodly looking thing you have ever seen. What are you going to do? Shake it out on the bus? Proceed to the nearest exit with dignity? I found myself in a situation. You know what happened to me? Something snapped right here. I could hear it. It went snap. Just like that. In my brain. I said to myself, you are sitting on a public bus like a human trash basket. This is not your first husband, your second husband, or your third husband. This is not the cruel judge who took away your child. This is not your Aunt Jessie, who has made your life so miserable since you've been living with her. This is not your boss. This is what alcohol has done to you. And that was my bottom. You know, I got sober in AA. Every time I have a girl come and weep on my shoulder, oh, I had the most horrible experience, it was so humiliating, or oh dear, I'll never... I said, good. The most wonderful thing that can happen to a woman is to have a humiliating experience that is so damn humiliating that you'll never recover from it. You know, every time I think about taking a drink, you know what I think about? That bus. And every time I see one of those city buses go by, I think about it. That was it for me. Ego deflation at depth, I suppose, is what they call it. Now I came into AA. I haven't had a drink since. It used to be an honor. Now people go, when I say I've never had a drink for 28 years, they go, yuck, as if it was just pretty tacky to have a record like that. I don't feel that way. It's not my fault I stayed sober. I had a lot of narrow escapes. One time I got to the liquor store and they just closed the door. So I'm not going to brag about how I just sat and read the big book and stayed sober all those years. But I have a theory. And the longer I've been in AA, the more convinced I am it's true. For every rotten, stinking, vile thing that's ever happened to you in your drinking, if you stay sober and are ready, every one of those things will come full circle for you. It may not be exactly the way you thought it would happen, but something will happen to make it come full circle. I'm going to give you a couple of examples to make you see what I mean. If you're drunk, something will come around the corner to make things right for you, and you'll never know it. If you're sober, it'll come around the corner and you'll see the connection. I'm one of these people. When I first got sober, after all my horrible experiences, I used to pace around in my little apartment and wonder why in the hell I got sober. What was I going to do with my life? My job reputation was finished. I'd had 3 husbands and 3 divorces, lost my child, lost my teeth. You know, I never did know what happened to them. I woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, and didn't have any front teeth. It just weren't any. I don't know whether somebody knocked them out, whether they fell out, whether I knocked them out myself on the bed. I never found them. I looked around. I didn't see any sign of them. Gone forever. I solved that by never smiling. It was 2 years in AA before I smiled, I'll tell you. People thought I was a grump. I just didn't have any teeth. Didn't have any teeth. Couldn't afford to get any. Walking around my apartment wondering why am I staying sober. Call my sponsor. Read chapter 5. Oh my God. Read chapter 5. I hated chapter 5. Chapter 5 made me sick. I still kind of wince when I hear Ray Early. I got so mad with chapter 5 and my sponsor for telling me every 5 minutes to read that thing that I tore the whole damn chapter out of the book. I just ripped it right out and threw it in the trash. I think I stomped on it too. And my sponsor said, "Feel better?" And I said, "Yes." And I hate that chapter, and I won't have anything to do with it. In later years, when I tried to get a girl to buy a big book, and she'd say she didn't have any money, I'd say, "I'll lend you my book." "Oh, I don't care for the big book. I'm not much of a reader. I've got other things to spend my money on." I said, "I'll give you mine. You can read it. Won't cost you a penny." I'd give a big book away to a girl, and she'd complain immediately. "One of the chapters is missing." I said, "Yeah, I tore it out on purpose." I said, "That's the chapter where Bill Wilson talks about sex." And I don't think you're ready for it. There are an awful lot of big books sold in my group. What happened was that my first husband, the father of my son, who was a terrible alcoholic, went into an alcoholic depression. He never went to AA. And when he was in a deep depression, he went out in the woods near Bethesda, and he blew his brains out. And my son came and rapped on my door. And at that time, I had a place for him to sleep. I had enough money to feed him and take care of him. It would have been an awful thing if I had been drunk. And for the first time in 25 years, I went into my bedroom and got on my knees and thanked God for my sobriety. And I have never, since that time, ever wondered why I was bothering to stay sober. Now, I've been sober about 6 years in AA. And I got a call from Intergroup that a bunch of young ladies in a very fancy school in Roland Park wanted someone to come and speak to them on alcoholism. Would I take the assignment? And I said I would be delighted. I love to talk. I don't know whether you've gathered that, but I do. So I went down to this fancy school, and there they were, in their little blue bloomers. And their little blue uniforms, and their little socks, and their little shoelaces, and their little pencil boxes. And I was a very serious person when I was in that stage of my sobriety. I didn't laugh much. And I gave them a very stern talk on the physical aspects of alcoholism, and they were bored to death. And I looked down at him, and I couldn't stand it another minute when I told him about the trip on the bus. And one girl in the back said, I had an older sister sell an old bag on a bus like that. Full circle. I began to laugh. I hadn't laughed for a long time at my own self. And I began to realize that one of the best ways in this world to get well is to laugh. I felt better about myself. I went down to Florida one time, the way the Lord arranges things. You know that man who was going to be a gigolo? Told me he went. I went down to Florida on a vacation, and by gosh, in Miami I ran into it. He looked good. Somebody was keeping him up, I'm telling you. I had the most bitter memories about that man. He had destroyed my self-esteem and had humiliated me and busted me up and everything else, and I hated him like poison, and I couldn't even mention his name. And when they played Open the Door Richard, his name was Richard, I would just turn the radio off. And he stood there, and he looked good. And so did I. I was at my very best, getting ready to go to a high-lie game. And it's funny. I looked at him, and we didn't speak because we didn't need to. He was glad I was all right, and I was glad he was all right. And it's so funny sometimes in your sobriety how everything falls away that you had held in your heart with hatred and bitterness for so long, and you just look at the person, and it was gone. I had a lot of other things happen to me that I can consider full circles, but I don't like to go on and on and on. I want to conclude with just one example that is probably the most important. It's about God. I hadn't had much contact. I had become very bitter. I had been turned away at the rail because I was divorced. I had sworn vengeance on God and the church and everything else. Anyone who ever hurt me in my drinking, I was going to get even with. And I had a spiritual feeling because I tried one day to imagine how I could describe the very best I could the way I feel about Alcoholics Anonymous and what has happened to me in my life. And it took me back to Africa. I was such a mess. I was such a pompous mess in Africa. I was so smart and I knew everything. And when we had an eclipse of the moon, all of the Somali people were standing up on a hill and they were yelling and shouting and beating on pans and drums. And I remember sitting in my smug way and drunk and saying to myself, such ignorance. They're afraid of an eclipse. And tomorrow in English class, I'm going to set them straight. So I went in drunk to the English class the next day. And I took a lemon and I took a grapefruit. And I began trying to explain to them how you have an eclipse. And I got all mixed up about it and I dropped them on the floor and I made a perfect fool of myself. But I did say to them, you see, you don't have to be afraid of anything. This is perfectly natural, and if you know the facts of nature, you don't have to go into this carrying on and yelling and screaming. The young man, who was the leader of the group, turned to me, and he said, no disrespect, but you are wrong. We are Muslims. We believe in God. We were not crying out in fear and anger. We were crying out in great joy because it has been our experience that God always brings back the light after the darkness if only you ask Him. Thank you so much.
And rarely have we seen a person who has so thoroughly delighted an audience on the opening session of our Session by the Sea. And as a little token of our appreciation, we'd like to give you this gift and our gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Not a dirty present, is it?
I don't think so. Now I'd like to ask Bob and Ann to lead us in the Lord's Prayer, close the meeting. Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Keep coming back. Thank you, dear.